Emily Tran never imagined that protecting someone else's future would cost her everything she'd worked for. When a private jet touched down in the hospital parking lot the morning after she lost her job, still bandaged from collapsing during her final shift, she had no idea that one act of compassion from years ago, about to change her life forever. The man stepping out of that sleek aircraft wasn't just any visitor. He was Hollywood's Marcus Lane, and he had a debt to repay that would turn Emily's world upside down. But how did a small-town nurse end up catching the attention of one of the most powerful men in entertainment, and what was he really offering her? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The fluorescent lights in St. Helena Medical Center hummed their familiar tune as Emily Tran checked her watch for what felt like the 100th time that shift. 43 hours. She'd been on her feet for 43 consecutive hours, covering for 3 different departments, as the hospital struggled through another staffing crisis. Her scrubs, originally a cheerful mint green, now bore the battle scars of her marathon shift. Coffee stains from the rushed break she'd taken at hour 28, medication splashes from the code blue at hour 36, and now fresh blood from the laceration she'd just sutured in the emergency department. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of the medical ward as Emily made her rounds, her steps slightly unsteady from exhaustion, but her focus sharp as ever. She'd been a registered nurse for 8 years, working her way up from the night shift in pediatrics to become one of the most trusted nurses in the hospital. Her colleagues often joked that she had healing hands, but Emily knew the truth was simpler. She genuinely cared about every patient who crossed her path, treating each person as if they were her own family member. "Emily, room 314 is asking for pain medication," called out Maria Santos, a nursing trainee who had been shadowing Emily for the past 2 weeks. Maria was 26, originally from Guatemala, and had been working as an unlicensed nursing assistant while studying to become a registered nurse. What most people at the hospital didn't know was that Maria's student visa had expired 6 months ago, and she was living in constant fear of deportation. Emily had discovered this during one of their late-night conversations in the break room, when Maria had broken down crying about her uncertain future. Emily nodded, pulling up the electronic chart for room 314 on her tablet. Mrs. Henderson, 78 years old, postoperative day 2, following a hip replacement. The woman had been struggling with pain management, and her medication schedule was crucial for her recovery. "What did you give her last, Maria?" Maria's face paled slightly, and she fumbled with her notepad. I gave her the morphine sulfate at 2 a.m., just like the chart said." Something in Maria's voice made Emily pause. She looked more closely at her trainee's face, noting the nervous fidgeting, the way Maria couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Maria, what exactly did you give her?" The younger woman's hands trembled as she showed Emily the medication vial. Emily's blood ran cold as she read the label. Morphine sulfate, 10 mg per ml. But the dosage that had been administered was written as 15 mg instead of the prescribed 5 mg. It was a critical error, one that could have serious consequences for an elderly patient's respiratory system. "Maria," Emily said quietly, pulling her into the supply room for privacy. "Tell me exactly what happened." Tears began streaming down Maria's face. "I was so tired, Emily. I'd been working double shifts at the restaurant after my hospital shifts to pay for my nursing classes, and I barely slept. When I looked at the chart, the handwriting was messy, and I thought it said 15 mg. I didn't double-check with another nurse like I should have. I made a mistake. I made a mistake." Emily felt her heart sink. A medication error of this magnitude would trigger an immediate investigation. Maria would be terminated instantly, and worse, her status as an undocumented worker would likely be discovered during the inquiry. She would be deported, her dreams of becoming a nurse shattered forever. "Have you documented the administration yet?" Emily asked, her mind racing through possible solutions. Maria shook her head. "I was just about to enter it into the system when Mrs. Henderson started asking for more pain relief. That's when I realized, Emily, what am I going to do? If they find out, I'll lose everything. My family back home is counting on me to finish nursing school and bring them here legally." Emily looked at the young woman who had shown such dedication and compassion over the past weeks, despite the enormous pressures she faced. Maria had a natural gift for patient care, and Emily had watched her comfort frightened children and hold the hands of dying patients with a gentleness that couldn't be taught. The thought of her being sent away because of one exhausted mistake felt fundamentally wrong. Without hesitation, Emily made a decision that would change both their lives. "Listen to me carefully, Maria. Go check on Mrs. Henderson's vital signs and stay with her. Monitor her breathing closely. If anything changes, call me immediately. I'll handle the documentation." "Emily, you can't. If they find out you're covering for me." "They won't find out," Emily said firmly, though her own hands were beginning to shake. "Go. Now." After Maria left, Emily stood alone in the supply room, staring at the medication error that wasn't hers to fix. She thought about her own career, the years of perfect performance reviews, the trust her supervisors had placed in her. Then she thought about Maria's dreams, her family's hopes, and the countless patients who would benefit from having such a caring nurse in the future. Emily accessed the electronic medication record system and began the careful process of altering the documentation. She changed the prescribed dosage from 5 mg to 15 mg in the original order, making it appear as though the higher dose had been intended all along. Then, she backdated a physician's note explaining the dosage increase due to the patient's continued pain complaints. The forgery was meticulous, drawing on her years of experience with the hospital systems and her knowledge of proper medical documentation. But changing the digital records wasn't enough. Emily knew there would be physical charts, paper trails that could expose the deception. She spent the next several hours tracking down every piece of documentation related to Mrs. Henderson's case, carefully altering prescription pads, nursing notes, and even the pharmacy dispensing records. It was exhausting work that required her to move through multiple departments, accessing files and systems she normally wouldn't touch. As the hours passed, Emily found herself making increasingly frequent trips to check on Mrs. Henderson. The elderly woman's vital signs remained stable, but Emily couldn't shake her anxiety about the medication error. She monitored the patient's breathing, checked her oxygen saturation, and adjusted her position regularly to ensure optimal respiratory function. At one point, Mrs. Henderson's breathing did become slightly labored, and Emily had to make a quick decision about whether to administer a reversal agent or simply provide supportive care. She chose the latter, and after an hour of careful monitoring, the patient's condition stabilized. The physical toll of her extended shift was beginning to show. Emily's vision occasionally blurred from exhaustion, and she'd started experiencing mild tremors in her hands. She'd consumed nothing but coffee and vending machine crackers for the past 12 hours, and her body was running on pure adrenaline. But every time she considered taking a break, she thought about Maria's grateful smile when she'd checked in earlier, and about Mrs. Henderson sleeping peacefully in room 314. By 6 a.m., Emily had managed to cover most of the paper trail, but she knew the most dangerous part was still ahead. The morning shift would bring fresh eyes, supervisors who might notice discrepancies, and the possibility that someone would question the unusual medication orders. She needed to create a believable narrative that would explain any remaining inconsistencies. Emily made her way to the physician's lounge, where she knew Dr. Richards, Mrs. Henderson's orthopedic surgeon, would be reviewing his cases before morning rounds. Dr. Richards was in his 50s, a competent surgeon, but not particularly detail-oriented when it came to postoperative pain management. Emily had worked with him dozens of times over the years. "Dr. Richards," she said, approaching him with what she hoped looked like routine professionalism despite her exhaustion. "I wanted to update you on Mrs. Henderson's pain management overnight. She was experiencing breakthrough pain around 2 a.m., so I contacted the on-call physician, and we increased her morphine dosage to 15 mg as needed. She's been much more comfortable since then." Dr. Richards barely looked up from his tablet. "Sounds reasonable. How are her vitals?" "Stable. Respiratory rate stayed within normal limits throughout the night. She should be ready for physical therapy later today." "Good work, Emily. I know it's been a tough shift for everyone with the staffing shortage." Emily nodded and left the lounge, her heart pounding. She just lied directly to a physician, implicating him in her cover-up without his knowledge. If anyone investigated deeply enough, Dr. Richards would likely remember their conversation and might even back up her story inadvertently. The morning shift change was approaching, and Emily knew she needed to complete one final task. She made her way back to the supply room where this whole ordeal had begun, intending to dispose of any remaining evidence and perhaps finally allow herself a few minutes to process what she'd done. But as she reached for the door handle, the exhaustion that had been building for nearly 2 days finally overwhelmed her. The room seemed to tilt sideways, and Emily felt her legs get out beneath her. She reached out to steady herself against a medical cart, but her depth perception was off, and instead of catching herself, she tumbled forward, striking her head against the sharp corner of a steel medication cabinet. The impact sent a shock of pain through her skull, and Emily felt warm blood beginning to trickle down her forehead. She tried to stand, but dizziness forced her back down onto the cold linoleum floor. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent the entire night caring for patients and covering up a medication error, only to injure herself in the very room where it all began. Emily managed to reach for her phone and dial the internal emergency number. "This is Emily Tran in supply room BS7. I need medical assistance." Her voice sounded distant and hollow even to her own ears. Within minutes, her colleagues arrived to find her sitting propped against the wall, blood matting her dark hair, her uniform torn from the fall. The paramedics who responded were people she worked with regularly, and their concern was evident as they assessed her condition. "Emily, what happened? How long have you been down here?" asked Jake Morrison, one of the EMTs. "I was just finishing up some documentation, got dizzy and fell. I think I hit my head pretty hard." The next few hours passed in a blur of CT scans, stitches, and paperwork. Emily had suffered a concussion and required 12 stitches to close the laceration on her forehead. The attending physician recommended she take at least 48 hours off work to recover, but Emily's mind was still focused on making sure her cover-up remained intact. As she lay in the emergency department bed, bandaged and medicated for pain, Emily watched the morning shift nurses beginning their routines through the open doorway. Maria walked past, their eyes meeting briefly. The younger woman's expression was filled with gratitude and concern, but she couldn't risk approaching Emily while supervisors were nearby. It was then that Emily noticed Carol Peterson, the hospital's chief nursing officer, approaching with a stern expression and a manila folder in her hands. Emily's heart began racing again, this time not from her injury, but from a growing sense that her careful deception might have been discovered. "Emily," Carol said, settling into the chair beside the bed with the gravity of someone about to deliver difficult news. "I need to speak with you about some irregularities we've discovered in Mrs. Henderson's medication records." Emily tried to keep her expression neutral despite the throbbing in her head. "What kind of irregularities?" "The pharmacy flagged an unusual morphine dosage increase that occurred during your shift. When we tried to verify the physician's order, we found some inconsistencies in the documentation timeline. The electronic records show one thing, but the paper charts tell a different story." Emily's carefully constructed cover-up was unraveling, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm not sure I understand. Dr. Richards and I discussed the dosage increase when Mrs. Henderson was experiencing breakthrough pain." Carol opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "That's what's strange, Emily. Dr. Richards has no memory of authorizing a dosage increase. And when our IT department ran a detailed audit of the medication system, they found evidence that someone accessed multiple patient records during your shift, including records you wouldn't normally need to review." The room felt like it was spinning, though Emily couldn't tell if it was from her concussion or from the realization that her deception had been discovered. She'd underestimated the hospital's digital security systems, failing to realize that every keystroke and system access was logged and traceable. "Emily," Carol continued, her voice becoming gentler, "I've known you for 8 years. You're one of our most dedicated nurses, and your patient care has been exemplary. But the evidence suggests that you deliberately falsified medical records, and that's something we simply cannot overlook." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision settling over her like a heavy blanket. She thought about Maria, probably working her shift upstairs, unaware that the sacrifice Emily had made was about to be rendered meaningless. She thought about Mrs. Henderson, recovering well from her surgery, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding her care. And she thought about her own future, about the career she'd worked so hard to build now crumbling around her. I need you to understand something, Carol said, pulling Emily from her thoughts. This isn't just about hospital policy. Falsifying medical records is a serious offense that we're required to report to the state nursing board. Your license will likely be suspended pending an investigation. And there could be criminal charges depending on what the district attorney decides. End quote. Emily nodded slowly, the full scope of the consequences beginning to dawn on her. She'd not only lost her job, but potentially her entire profession. The irony was crushing. In trying to protect Maria's future as a nurse, she'd destroyed her own. I need your identification badge and any hospital property you might have, Carol said, extending her hand. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. With trembling fingers, Emily unclipped the badge she'd worn proudly for 8 years. The small plastic card felt heavier than it should have as she placed it in Carol's palm, symbolizing not just the end of her job, but the end of her identity as a healer. The discharge process was surreal. Emily found herself signing paperwork to end her employment while simultaneously signing discharge instructions for her medical treatment. The bandage wrapped around her forehead served as a visible reminder of how spectacularly her attempt to help had backfired. As she walked through the hospital corridors, for what would likely be the last time, Emily couldn't help but notice the familiar sounds and smells that had been part of her daily life for so long. The beeping of monitors, the antiseptic scent of cleaning solutions, the soft conversations between nurses and patients. She'd given up all of this to protect someone who might not even know the full extent of what had been sacrificed. The October morning air was crisp as Emily stepped out of the hospital's main entrance, still wearing the scrubs from her 43-hour shift, now torn and stained with her own blood. She clutched the termination letter in one hand and held her discharge instructions in the other, feeling utterly alone in the vast parking lot. Other hospital employees passed by, some recognizing her and offering concerned looks at her bandaged head. But Emily couldn't bring herself to explain what had happened. How could she tell them that she'd thrown away her entire career in a single night? How could she explain that she'd commit the same crime again if it meant protecting someone like Maria? Emily had parked her car in the far corner of the lot, a habit from her early morning arrivals when spaces near the building were scarce. As she walked across the asphalt, her head still pounding from the concussion, she heard an unusual sound cutting through the morning air. The distinctive roar of jet engines, but much closer and louder than the commercial flights that occasionally passed overhead. Looking up, Emily saw a sleek private aircraft approaching the hospital grounds, its landing lights clearly visible against the gray sky. The jet was descending rapidly, and Emily realized with amazement that it appeared to be heading for the large open field that bordered the hospital property, an area sometimes used for helicopter medical evacuations but never for fixed-wing aircraft. The jet touched down smoothly on the grass field, its engines winding down as it came to a stop just a few hundred yards from where Emily stood. The aircraft was beautiful, painted in deep blue and silver with no visible commercial markings. Emily had never seen anything like it at St. Helena Medical Center. As she watched in fascination, a black SUV pulled up near the edge of the field, seemingly appearing from nowhere. Emily realized she must have been so focused on the aircraft that she hadn't noticed the vehicle approaching. A man stepped out of the SUV, tall and well-dressed in an expensive-looking coat, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being in control. Even from a distance, there was something familiar about the man's profile, the way he carried himself. As he walked closer to where Emily stood in the parking lot, recognition dawned on her with startling clarity. It was Marcus Lane, the Hollywood actor whose face graced magazine covers and movie posters around the world. But what was Marcus Lane doing in a small-town hospital in Oregon, arriving by private jet on a Tuesday morning? Emily's concussed brain struggled to process this surreal addition to what had already been the strangest day of her life. Marcus was walking directly toward her now, his eyes fixed on her face, with an expression of recognition that matched her own. As he approached, Emily became acutely aware of her appearance: blood-stained scrubs, disheveled hair, a bandage wrapped around her forehead, and exhaustion written in every line of her face. "Emily Tran," Marcus said as he reached her, his famous voice immediately recognizable even in this impossible context. "I wasn't sure I'd be able to find you." Emily stared at him, wondering if her concussion was causing hallucinations. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" Marcus smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his movie star features into something more human and approachable. "We've never been formally introduced, but you saved my mother's life 3 years ago. Margaret Lane. She was a patient here during her final weeks." The memory came flooding back with startling clarity. Margaret Lane, registered under an assumed name to protect her privacy, had been admitted to the hospital during Emily's rotation in the oncology ward. The woman had been in the final stages of pancreatic cancer, and her family had specifically requested that her celebrity son's identity be kept completely confidential to avoid media attention during their most vulnerable time. Emily remembered Margaret as a gracious, soft-spoken woman who faced her diagnosis with remarkable courage. She'd spent countless hours sitting with Margaret during her chemotherapy sessions, helping her write letters to her family, and simply providing comfort during the long, painful nights when sleep wouldn't come. Margaret had often spoken about her son, a successful actor, but she'd been adamant about not wanting him to sacrifice his career to sit by her bedside. "Mrs. Lane," Emily whispered, the pieces falling into place. She was an extraordinary woman." "She was," Marcus agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And she talked about you constantly during her final weeks. She said you were the only nurse who treated her like a person instead of a patient. She told me how you'd read to her from her favorite books, how you'd sneak her real coffee instead of the hospital coffee, how you held her hand during the worst moments." Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes, both from the memory of Margaret and from the overwhelming strangeness of this encounter. "She didn't want you to know she was here. She was so proud of your career, so worried about you missing important opportunities." "I know," Marcus said softly. "She made the hospital promise not to contact me until the very end. By the time I got here, she was unconscious. I never got to thank her for giving me that gift, or to thank you for the compassion you showed her when I couldn't be here." Emily wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, wincing as she accidentally brushed against her bandaged forehead. She didn't need to be thanked. Taking care of her it was an honor. Marcus studied Emily's injured face with growing concern. "What happened to you? Are you all right?" The simple question broke through Emily's emotional defenses, and suddenly the exhaustion and trauma of the past 24 hours came pouring out. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried to help someone, and I lost everything. I lost my job, my career, probably my nursing license. I don't know what I'm going to do." Without hesitation, Marcus placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Tell me what happened." Standing there in the hospital parking lot, with a private jet gleaming in the field behind them, and the morning sun casting long shadows across the asphalt, Emily found herself telling Marcus the entire story. She explained about Maria, about the medication error, about her decision to falsify the records, and about the consequences that had followed. She told him about her 43-hour shift, about collapsing in the supply room, and about waking up to find her career in ruins. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. When Emily finished, he was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd shared. "So you sacrificed your career to protect someone else," he said finally. "Someone who would have been deported if you hadn't intervened." Emily nodded, suddenly feeling embarrassed by her actions. "I know it sounds foolish. I know I should have followed proper procedures. But Maria is going to be an incredible nurse someday. She just needed a chance." "It doesn't sound foolish," Marcus said firmly. "It sounds like exactly the kind of person my mother described to me. Someone who puts compassion above self-interest, even when it costs everything." Emily looked at him in confusion. "Why are you here, Mr. Lane? How did you even know what happened?" Marcus smiled, but there was something serious in his eyes. "I have a foundation, Emily. The Margaret Lane Foundation for Healthcare Excellence. We provide scholarships, fund medical research, and identify exceptional healthcare workers who deserve recognition and support. I've been keeping an eye on this hospital since my mother's time here, and when I heard about a nurse who sacrificed her career to protect a colleague, I knew I had to meet her." Emily felt her heart racing. though she wasn't sure if it was from hope or fear. "I don't understand." "My mother left me a letter," Marcus continued, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out an envelope. "She wrote it during her final days here, and in it, she specifically mentioned you. She said that if I ever had the opportunity to help you, I should do whatever it takes to support someone with such a rare gift for healing." Emily stared at the envelope, recognizing Margaret's handwriting on the front. Her own name was written there in shaky but determined letters. "She also left instructions for me to establish a nursing scholarship program in her honor," Marcus said. "But more than that, she wanted me to find a way to support nurses who demonstrate exceptional compassion, even when the system fails them." Emily felt dizzy again, though this time it had nothing to do with her concussion. "What are you saying?" Marcus looked back toward his jet, then returned his gaze to Emily's bandaged face. "I'm saying that losing your job here doesn't have to be the end of your career as a nurse. I'm offering you a position as the AC, Director of Nursing, for a new medical facility I'm funding in Costa Rica. It's a state-of-the-art hospital serving underserved communities, and it needs someone with your experience and compassion to establish its nursing program." End quote. Emily's mind reeled at the implications. Costa Rica? But my license issues, the investigation, the position would be funded through my foundation, operating under international medical aid provisions, Marcus explained. "Your U.S. license issues wouldn't prevent you from practicing there, and the work would be legitimate, legal, and incredibly meaningful. You'd be helping train a new generation of nurses while providing care to people who desperately need it." Emily thought about Maria, still working upstairs in the hospital, probably terrified about what Emily's investigation might reveal. "What about the people here? What about Maria?" Marcus's expression softened. "The foundation can provide immigration legal assistance and nursing school scholarships for qualified candidates. If Maria is as dedicated as you say she is, we can help her achieve her dreams through legal channels." The offer was beyond anything Emily could have imagined, but the magnitude of it also felt overwhelming. "Why would you do this for me? You barely know me." "Because my mother's final wish was for me to honor the people who had honored her," Marcus said simply. "And because the world needs more nurses like you, people who are willing to sacrifice for others even when no one is watching." Emily looked back at the hospital building where she'd spent 8 years of her life, where her career had just ended in disgrace. Then she looked at the private jet waiting in the field, representing possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. The choice felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than her real life. "I need time to think," Emily said finally. "This is all so sudden, and my head is still spinning from everything that's happened." Marcus nodded understandingly. "Of course. But I want you to know that this offer isn't charity. The facility in Costa Rica genuinely needs someone with your skills and experience. You wouldn't just be accepting help, you'd be providing something invaluable in return." He handed her a business card with his personal contact information. "Take all the time you need to decide. The jet will be here for the rest of the day if you want to see the facility firsthand before making a choice." Emily took the card with trembling fingers, still struggling to believe this conversation was really happening. "Can I ask you something? Anything? How did you know I was here this morning? How did you know about what happened with my job?" Marcus smiled mysteriously. "I have people who monitor news about exceptional healthcare workers. When a story comes across their desk about a nurse who falsified records to protect a colleague from deportation, it tends to get my attention. Especially when that nurse works at the same hospital where my mother spent her final days." Emily realized that her story had probably already spread throughout the hospital's administrative network, and possibly beyond. She wondered how long it would be before the local media picked up the story, turning her into either a cautionary tale or a symbol of misplaced compassion. "There's something else," Marcus added. "The foundation has a legal team that specializes in healthcare worker advocacy. If you're interested, they might be able to help with your licensing issues here in the States. What you did was technically wrong, but your motivations were pure, and that counts for something." Emily felt tears streaming down her face again, overwhelmed by this stranger's kindness and the impossible turn her life had taken. Just hours ago, she'd been lying on the emergency room bed, certain that her career was over and her future was ruined. Now she was being offered not just redemption, but the opportunity to continue her calling on an international scale. "I should get going," Emily said finally, gesturing toward her car. "I need to process all of this, and I should probably get some rest." Marcus nodded, but before she could walk away, he called out one more time. "Emily, there's one last thing my mother wanted me to tell you if I ever had the chance." Emily turned back to face him, waiting. "She said to remind you that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen when no one is watching, and that the world is a better place because of people like you." As Emily walked across the parking lot toward her car, she could hear the jet engines beginning to wind up again in the field behind her. She clutched Marcus's business card in one hand and her termination letter in the other, symbols of her ending and her potential new beginning. The drive home passed in a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. Emily's small apartment felt different when she walked through the door. As if the events of the morning had changed not just her circumstances, but her entire perception of reality. She set the termination letter on her kitchen table, next to Marcus's business card. Staring at both documents as if they might provide some clarity about what she should do next. Her phone had been buzzing with missed calls and text messages throughout the morning, mostly from colleagues who had heard about her termination. Emily scrolled through them, noting the mixture of concern, confusion, and support from people she'd worked with for years. There was also a message from Maria. Sent just an hour ago. "Emily, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen to you. Please call me." Emily set the phone aside without responding. She wasn't ready to face the reality of what her sacrifice had cost, or to deal with Maria's guilt over the situation. Right now, she needed space to think about Marcus's offer and what it might mean for her future. She made herself a cup of tea and settled onto her couch, finally allowing herself to truly process everything that had happened. The beret, medication error, her decision to cover it up, the hours of careful falsification, her collapse in the supply room, waking up to find her career destroyed, and then the surreal encounter with Marcus Lane in the parking lot. It felt like a lifetime's worth of events compressed into a single day. Emily thought about Margaret Lane, the quiet dignity with which she'd faced her final weeks, and the conversations they'd shared during those long hospital nights. Margaret had often talked about her son's success, but she'd also expressed worry about whether his fame and fortune had cost him the ability to connect with ordinary people. She'd wondered if he would ever find meaningful ways to use his privilege to help others. Now, Emily realized, Margaret had orchestrated exactly that. Her final letter and her instructions for the foundation had created a bridge between her son's resources and Emily's dedication to healing. It was a beautiful legacy, one that extended Margaret's compassion beyond her own lifetime. The more Emily thought about the offer, the more appealing it became. She'd always been drawn to international nursing, fascinated by the idea of providing care in underserved communities where her skills could make the greatest difference. The opportunity to establish a nursing program from the ground up, to mentor a new generation of healthcare workers, and to continue practicing her profession despite the licensing issues she faced in the United States, seemed almost too good to be true. But there were practical considerations as well. Emily had never lived outside the United States, didn't speak Spanish fluently, and had no experience with international medical protocols. The idea of moving to Costa Rica, beautiful as it sounded, also meant leaving behind everything familiar: her apartment, her friends, her community, and any chance of eventually rebuilding her career in the States. Emily dozed fitfully on the couch, her concussion making it difficult to maintain a clear train of thought. She dreamed of Margaret Lane, of Maria crying in the supply room, of private jets and foreign hospitals, all mixed together in a confused narrative that reflected her emotional state. She was awakened by a knock at her door. Looking through the peephole, Emily was surprised to see Maria standing in the hallway, still wearing her hospital scrubs and looking anxious. Emily hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. "Maria, you shouldn't be here. If anyone from the hospital sees you—" "I don't care," Maria said, tears already streaming down her face. "Emily, what you did for me. I can't let you destroy your life for my mistake." Emily stepped back to let Maria enter, noting how young and vulnerable the trainee looked in the afternoon light, filtering through her apartment windows. "It's too late for that, Maria. What's done is done." "No, it's not," Maria said firmly. "I can go to Carol Peterson right now and tell her the truth. I can explain that you were just trying to protect me, and that the real medication error was mine. Maybe if they understand what really happened." Emily shook her head. "That won't help anything now. The investigation has already revealed the falsified records. Even if you confess, I still committed a serious violation of professional ethics. And if you admit to the error, you'll be terminated immediately, and likely deported." Maria sank into Emily's armchair, burying her face in her hands. "This is all my fault. You were just trying to help me, and now you've lost everything." "I hadn't lost everything," Emily said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "I made a choice, Maria. I chose to protect someone who deserved protection, and I'd make the same choice again." Emily told Maria about Marcus Lane's visit, about the job offer in Costa Rica, and about the possibility of legal assistance for both of them through the foundation. As she spoke, she watched Maria's expression shift from despair to amazement. "You're going to take it, aren't you?" Maria asked. "You're going to go to Costa Rica?" Emily realized that saying the words out loud had helped clarify her thinking. "I think I am. It's terrifying, but it's also an incredible opportunity to continue doing what I love, in a place where I can make a real difference." Maria stood up and impulsively hugged Emily, careful to avoid her bandaged forehead. "You're the most amazing person I've ever met. I promise, I'll make this sacrifice worth it. I'll become the best nurse I can be, and I'll help other people the way you helped me." After Maria left, Emily felt a sense of peace settling over her for the first time since the medication error had occurred. She called the number on Marcus's business card, and he answered on the first ring. "Emily, I was hoping to hear from you today. Have you had a chance to think about the offer?" "I have," Emily said, looking out her window toward the hospital in the distance. "And I'd like to accept the position in Costa Rica." "That's wonderful news," Marcus said, genuine warmth in his voice. "I know this is a big leap for you, but I think you're going to love the work there. When would you be able to start?" Emily thought about her lease, her belongings, her life in Oregon. "I'll need a few weeks to wrap up my affairs here, but I could probably be ready to travel within the month." "Perfect. I'll have my assistant coordinate the logistics with you. And Emily, I want you to know how much this means to me. My mother would be so proud to know that her legacy is continuing through your work." That evening, Emily began making lists of everything she needed to accomplish before leaving the country. She called her landlord to discuss breaking her lease, contacted her bank about international banking options, and started researching Costa Rica's culture and healthcare system. With each task she completed, the reality of her decision became more concrete, and her excitement grew alongside her nervousness. The following morning, Emily received a call from Marcus's assistant, a professional woman named Catherine who spoke with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex international arrangements. "Mr. Lane has asked me to coordinate your transition to Costa Rica," Catherine explained. "We've prepared a comprehensive package that includes your visa documentation, housing arrangements, and a detailed orientation program for the medical facility." Emily learned that the hospital was located in the mountains outside San Jose Tilde copyright, in a region that served both local communities and medical tourists seeking affordable, high-quality care. Facility was designed to be completely bilingual, with American and European standards of care adapted for the local population's needs. Her role would involve establishing nursing protocols, training local staff, and eventually expanding the program to include a nursing school. There's something else," Catherine added. "Mr. Lane has asked me to arrange legal representation for your licensing issues in Oregon. The Foundation's attorneys believe they can negotiate a settlement that would allow you to maintain your nursing credentials, possibly with some form of probation or continuing education requirement." Emily felt a surge of hope she hadn't expected, the possibility of eventually returning to practice in the United States, should she choose to, would provide a safety net that made her leap of faith feel less permanent. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily's life transformed with remarkable speed. The Foundation's legal team proved as effective as promised, negotiating a settlement with the Oregon State Board of Nursing that suspended her license for 6 months, but allowed for reinstatement upon completion of CHI, ethics coursework, and community service hours. The agreement acknowledged the exceptional circumstances of her case and her previously spotless record. Maria, meanwhile, had connected with the Foundation's immigration attorneys, who were working to regularize her status through a special program for healthcare workers. She would be able to continue her nursing education with a Foundation scholarship while her immigration case proceeded through proper legal channels. "I still can't believe this is really happening," Maria said during one of their final conversations before Emily's departure. "6 months ago, I was terrified I'd be deported before finishing school. Now I have a full scholarship and a pathway to citizenship." Emily smiled, adjusting the small bandage that still covered her healing forehead wound. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to the best opportunities. "I lost my job, but I'm about to start the adventure of a lifetime." The night before her departure, Emily stood in her nearly empty apartment, surrounded by boxes containing the few possessions she'd decided to take with her. Most of her furniture would go to Maria, who was moving into a Foundation-sponsored housing program for nursing students. Emily had packed only the essentials: her nursing textbooks, some personal photos, and a few sentimental items that connected her to her life in Oregon. She pulled out the letter Marcus had given her from his mother, the one she'd been too emotional to read during their first encounter. Margaret's handwriting was weak but clear, her words carrying the wisdom of someone facing their final days with grace and purpose. "My dear Emily," the letter began, "if Marcus is reading this to you, it means that you've found yourself in need of the kind of help that only someone who truly understands compassion can provide. During my final weeks at St. Helena, you showed me what it means to care for another person with your whole heart. You didn't just tend to my medical needs, you saw me as a complete human being deserving of dignity, comfort, and genuine connection." Emily felt tears beginning to flow as she continued reading. Margaret had written about their conversations, about the books Emily had read to her, about the small kindnesses that had made her final days bearable. But more than that, she'd written about her hopes for Emily's future. "I see in you the kind of nurse who will never be satisfied with simply following protocols," Margaret had written. "You have the courage to make difficult decisions based on what you believe is right, even when the system fails to support that courage. I've asked Marcus to watch for opportunities to help people like you, because the world desperately needs healthcare workers who lead with their hearts." The letter concluded with a prediction that felt prophetic. "I suspect that your greatest challenges will also become your greatest opportunities. Trust your instincts, dear Emily, and never apologize for choosing compassion over convenience." Emily folded the letter carefully and placed it in her carry-on bag. Tomorrow, she would board a plane to Costa Rica to begin a new chapter of her life, one that would have been impossible without Margaret's foresight and Marcus's generosity. The flight to San Jose Tilde copyright was Emily's first international trip, and she spent much of the journey staring out the window at the changing landscape below. When the plane descended through the clouds, and she caught her first glimpse of Costa Rica's lush mountains and coastline, Emily felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded her of her first day of nursing school. Marcus had arranged for Emily to be met at the airport by Dr. Carmen Rodriguez, the medical director of the new facility. Dr. Rodriguez was a Costa Rican physician who had trained at Johns Hopkins before returning to her home country to work in public health. She greeted Emily with warmth and immediately put her at ease, with her perfect English and obvious enthusiasm for the project. "We've been waiting months for the right person to lead our nursing program," Dr. Rodriguez explained as they drove through the bustling streets of San Jose Tilde copyright toward the mountains. "When Marcus told us about your background and your commitment to patient advocacy, we knew you were exactly what we needed." The hospital, nestled in a valley surrounded by coffee plantations and cloud forests, exceeded Emily's expectations. The building was modern and spacious, with large windows that flooded every room with natural light. The equipment was state-of-the-art, and the facility had been designed with both efficiency and patient comfort in mind. "We serve a unique population here," Dr. Rodriguez explained as she gave Emily a tour. local families who have never had access to advanced medical care, expatriate retirees who choose to live in Costa Rica, and medical tourists from North America who come here for procedures they can't afford in their home countries. It creates interesting challenges, but also incredible opportunities to make a difference. Emily's living quarters were a small but comfortable apartment on the hospital grounds, with a view of the mountains and a small garden where she could grow her own herbs. The setup allowed her to be available for emergencies while maintaining some personal space and privacy. On her first day of work, Emily met the local nursing staff she would be training and supervising. Most were recent graduates from Costa Rican nursing programs, eager to learn advanced techniques and protocols. A few were experienced nurses who had worked in the public health system and were excited about the opportunity to work with cutting-edge equipment and international standards. "Sea tilde plus or minus ora Emily," said Sofia Herrera, one of the senior nurses. "We have heard so much about your experience in the United States. We are ready to learn everything you can teach us." Emily spent her first weeks observing the current nursing practices, identifying areas for improvement, and getting to know each staff member individually. She was impressed by their dedication and natural compassion, qualities that reminded her of her own early days in nursing. What they lacked in technical training, they more than made up for in genuine care for their patients. The patient population was indeed diverse, ranging from local farmers seeking treatment for chronic conditions to wealthy Americans recovering from cosmetic procedures. Emily found that her experience caring for Margaret Lane, maintaining dignity and privacy while providing exceptional care, served her well in this international setting. One of Emily's first major challenges came when a medical tourist from Canada developed complications following a routine procedure. The patient's family was demanding standards of care that exceeded what the local staff had been trained to provide, creating tension and anxiety among the nursing team. Emily recognized the situation as an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of patient advocacy she'd always believed in. She spent extra time with the family, explaining the treatment plan and addressing their concerns with the same patience and thoroughness she would have shown in Oregon. She also worked with the nursing staff to ensure they understood not just the technical aspects of the patient's care, but the emotional needs of a family dealing with unexpected complications in a foreign country. "You didn't just solve a medical problem," Sophia observed after the situation had been resolved successfully. "You showed us how to care for the whole family, not just the patient." Emily realized that this was exactly the kind of impact she'd hoped to make. She wasn't just teaching nursing techniques. She was modeling a philosophy of care that put human dignity and compassion at the center of every interaction. As the months passed, Emily established protocols that became the foundation of the hospital's nursing program. She created training modules that could be adapted for nurses with varying levels of experience, developed quality assurance procedures that ensured consistent care across all departments, and began planning for the nursing school that would eventually train the next generation of Costa Rican healthcare workers. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Emily found herself energized by the opportunity to build something from the ground up, to see her vision for compassionate healthcare taking shape in a concrete way. She also discovered that her experience with Maria and the medication error had given her insights into the pressures faced by nurses from different cultural and educational backgrounds. Emily made it a priority to create a supportive environment where staff could ask questions, admit mistakes, and learn from each other without fear of punishment. She instituted weekly case reviews where the team could discuss challenging situations and share different approaches to patient care. Most importantly, she established a culture of transparency and mutual support that reminded her of the best aspects of nursing she'd experienced in Oregon. 6 months after her arrival, Emily received a call from Marcus with exciting news. "The Foundation Board has approved expansion of the Costa Rica project," he told her. "We're planning to add a research component focused on international nursing education, and we'd like you to lead it." The research program would study the most effective methods for training nurses in international settings, with the goal of replicating the Costa Rica model in other countries. Emily would have the opportunity to travel throughout Central and South America, consulting with other healthcare facilities and sharing the knowledge she'd gained. "There's something else," Marcus added. "The Oregon State Board has agreed to reinstate your nursing license, Your probationary period is complete, and your work in Costa Rica has been recognized as exceptional community service. If you ever want to return to practice in the United States, that door is now open." Emily looked out her apartment window, at the mountains that had become so familiar over the past months, at the hospital where she'd found renewed purpose in her calling. The option to return to Oregon felt important, but she realized she wasn't ready to leave Costa Rica yet. She'd found something here that she'd never experienced before, the opportunity to practice nursing exactly as she believed it should be practiced, with unlimited support for putting compassion at the center of everything she did. "I'm grateful to have the option," Emily told Marcus, "but I think my work here is just beginning. There's still so much we can accomplish." That evening, Emily walked through the hospital corridors during the night shift, a routine she'd maintained since her early days in Oregon. She checked on patients, chatted with the nursing staff, and ensured that everything was running smoothly. But unlike her exhausting 43-hour shift at St. Helena, these night rounds filled her with energy and satisfaction. She stopped by the room of a young Costa Rican boy who was recovering from surgery to repair a congenital heart defect. His family had traveled from a remote mountain village for the procedure, their first experience with advanced medical care. Emily had worked closely with his nurse, teaching her specialized techniques for pediatric cardiac care. "A circumflex tilde, thremo sions esta noche?" Emily asked the boy in her steadily improving Spanish. "Megar, tilde plus or minus ora Emily," he replied with a shy smile. "Ma me tilde dice, que ustedes un tilde young gel." Emily smiled at being called an angel, remembering similar comments from patients back in Oregon. The universal nature of healing, the way compassion translated across all languages and cultures, never failed to move her. As she continued her rounds, Emily thought about Maria, who had just completed her first semester of nursing school with honors. They exchanged regular emails, and Maria often wrote about how Emily's example continued to inspire her approach to patient care. The Foundation's legal team had successfully resolved Maria's immigration status, and she was now on track to become a registered nurse within 2 years. Emily also thought about Margaret Lane, whose final wish had set all of these changes in motion. The letter Emily had received from Marcus's mother had proven prophetic in ways Margaret probably never could have imagined. Her greatest challenge had indeed become her greatest opportunity, and her willingness to choose compassion over convenience had led to a career that exceeded her wildest dreams. The nursing school was scheduled to open the following year, and Emily was already developing the curriculum that would train the first class of students. She'd incorporated everything she'd learned about mentorship, advocacy, and the balance between technical competence and emotional intelligence that defined truly exceptional nursing care. But perhaps most importantly, Emily had learned that sometimes the most meaningful acts of service required taking risks, making difficult choices, and trusting that doing the right thing would ultimately lead to the right outcome. Her decision to protect Maria had cost her everything she thought she wanted, only to give her everything she actually needed. As Emily completed her night rounds and returned to her apartment, she looked up at the stars visible through the clear mountain air, brighter and more numerous than she'd ever seen in Oregon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients to care for, new nurses to mentor, and new opportunities to make a difference in the world. She thought about the termination letter that still sat in a box, somewhere among her possessions, a reminder of how quickly life did change. But she also thought about the business card that had accompanied it, about the private jet that had appeared when she needed it most, and about the extraordinary chain of events that had brought her to this place. Emily realized that her story wasn't really about losing a job or finding a new one. It was about discovering that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't required for dramatic gestures or heroic moments, but for the quiet decision to put someone else's welfare above your own security. It was about learning that the most important qualifications for being a healer weren't technical skills or professional credentials, but an unshakable commitment to treating every person with dignity, compassion, and hope. As she drifted off to sleep in her small apartment overlooking the Costa Rican mountains, Emily smiled at the thought that Margaret Lane's prediction had come true in the most beautiful way possible. Her greatest challenge had become her greatest opportunity, And she had indeed learned to trust her instincts and never apologize for choosing compassion over convenience. The next morning would bring new patients, new lessons to teach, new problems to solve, and new opportunities to practice the kind of nursing that had always been her calling. And Emily Tran, no longer the disgraced nurse clutching a termination letter in a hospital parking lot, but now the director of nursing at one of Central America's most innovative medical facilities, was ready for Bala. Whatever came next,